welcome back to another episode of the Filmaholic. This is our One Tree Hill rewatch, and we are almost done with the high school years of One Tree Hill. We're almost done with season 4. I'm going to be doing the last few episodes here. But this particular video, I'm going to be talking about 4 episodes, 415 through 418. So the last episode we ended with was 414, and that was the day before prom, and it ended with the night before prom and Nathan and Brooke sex tape coming out, and Haley among everyone else at the party seeing what happened a couple years ago. So this episode is called Prom Night at Hater High. It originally aired February 21st, 2007. It was directed by Paul Johansson and written by Mike Hero and David Strauss. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you know I am a big fan of Paul Johansson, both in front of the camera and behind the camera. He's one of the best directors on the show, as playing my favorite character on the show, Dan. Mike Hero and David Strauss are also very good writers on the show. I really like their work, even though they do write my least favorite episode, and we'll get to that when we get to it. But it was a good pairing. I like when both them and Paul Johansson get to team up as a writer and a director duo on episodes. And usually, if you've seen my past episodes this season, I've been mentioning how I feel like they've kind of wasted Paul Johansson and his directing abilities with a few episodes. Not that they're bad episodes, but they're just, I feel like he just should have gotten bigger episodes to direct. This is actually a pretty big episode and is a very well-written episode, and a lot happens in this one. So I'm glad he did get to direct this one. I think it was a good decision to have him come on and do this one. And I'm glad that he, didn't have another episode where his talents was wasted. So overall, though, this episode is mainly getting you ready for that prom episode that's happening in the next one. It ends with prom at the end of this episode, but it's also following the videotape coming out in the last episode. So overall, great performance from Hillary Burton, and great performance from Sophia Bush as well, especially their scenes together in this episode. But ultimately, Hillary Burton steals the show because she has all these scenes with different people, with Lucas, with Nathan, with Brooke, of course, where she is dealing with the fact that she's took all this abuse and all of this anger from Brooke and this guilt of what she did with Lucas, which is not making that necessarily okay, especially the first time with Lucas. This past time, it's really her admitting her feelings, not her acting on it. But the first time. But ultimately, Brooke did something worse. She literally had sex with Nathan when they were together, when Peyton and Nathan were together. Now, Brooke keeps throwing up the thing, like pretty much the Friends line, we were on a break, well, they were broken up. That's what she keeps saying. Doesn't matter. And that's what Rachel even tells her later in the episode. You wouldn't have felt the same if the places were swapped. So going on, continuing with Hillary Burton's performance, my favorite scene in this episode, and one of my favorite scenes in this season, is the fight scene between Peyton and Brooke. Brooke is egging Peyton's house. Now, she's already came over and confronted Peyton once. They've already had a couple scenes. Peyton gave her a black eye at the beginning of this episode, which continued from the last one, which was a good scene too. But, she's egging her house. They're arguing about the dress because Peyton took Brooke's dress and has it. So they're arguing. Peyton ends up tackling her to the ground. They get in a fight on the ground. But what the best part of this is after the fight, the back and forth between Peyton and Brooke, the exchange there, and Hillary Burton's performance as her character is breaking down and talking to someone who was her best friend, and just how Brooke has acted awful to her this season. And it's something that, in the scene back in 409 and other scenes as well, talking about Peyton's mom, both her moms, and then Brooke using it as a punchline to hurt her. That scene breaks me down every time I watch it. Like, that was such incredible acting from Hillary Burton, but really good writing as well. Love that scene. One of the best of the season, and one of Hillary Burton's best in general, I think. I also want to talk about how Lucas is an idiot sometimes. I like Chad Michael Murray as Lucas. I like Lucas for the most part um, in the high school years. We'll talk about how I feel about him in the after high school years later. But right now we're just talking about high school. Um, but yeah, he goes to visit Brooke before he goes to see Peyton. So don't know why you would go visit someone you weren't dating before you go visit your girlfriend. That's odd. And Peyton brings that up. And like, do you ever defend the girl that you're dating? Like, what is happening? Dude, it's stupid decision. Also, he makes the decision, and we see this later in the end of the episode, where he's like, Peyton doesn't want to go to prom. And understand that he does. And it's a big deal for some people, prom. But the fact that he says, if you're not going to go, I guess I'll be going along. Why would you go to prom without your girlfriend? If your girlfriend, like, if you were in this situation, a good thing for Lucas to do, I think, would have been whatever decision Peyton made, him to have stayed there with her. Now, so I don't like that character decision. I think it's stupid. And I don't know if Lucas would have actually done it, if you really think about it. Would Lucas have made that stupid decision? But then you also got to think, sometimes you just have to live with some of these decisions because it's for the writing of the overall show. So if Lucas had stayed there, you couldn't have the situation with Psycho Derek, which you obviously were trying to do and bring him back. So you have to deal with what you get. And this happens in several other instances too. There's a future episode where there's a scene where Lucas goes to get Deb's gun, and I'll talk about that and we'll get to it in episode 19. But when we watched it, there's several cookie jars in the kitchen, and Lucas goes to one in particular, gets it, and it happens to be where the gun is. But he didn't know which cookie jar it was, and Sarah was like, well, are we just supposed to believe that he knew exactly which one and chose that one first time? And I was like, it is a thing, like if you think about it, like little things like that with film, with movies, TV, whatever, but sometimes you just have to have it work the first time perfectly because you just don't got time within 42 minutes of the episode to show him trying 3 different cookie jars or to explain things. You just have to take it and live with it, unfortunately. But yeah, so we got past the Lucas thing. We got past Hillary Burton's incredible performance in this episode. Rachel was expelled in this episode. She already got in trouble, but she hasn't really gotten her punishment yet. That actually happens in this episode. She is expelled. And I haven't really been a big fan of the Rachel character. Not a really big fan of her friendship with Brooke even, and the storyline of this whole season wasn't for me. But I did really like their friendship there at the end. In the scenes, like I really liked the goodbye between Brooke and Rachel at the house. I thought that was really good, and future scenes when we see them together in the finale, I like that as well. Chase breaks up with Brooke in this episode. Chase is a dope. Not a big Chase fan either for his character. Now, once again, he does come back in the later seasons. I like him better than how he's written and how he acts, but for the most part, because I'm just. I block out some things, especially from Season 8, because I'm not a huge fan of Season 8. But, I like Chase in Season 6. I'll say that. Beyond that, it gets a little sloppy with Chase. And we'll talk about that when we get there. Anyways, he comes back. He breaks up with Brooke because Brooke, slept with Peyton's boyfriend when they were best friends, and that happened to him and his friend in the past, and it upsets him, so he doesn't want to be a part of a relationship with her. But they can go to prom together for some stupid reason, but Brooke's like, nah, I don't want to do that. If we're going to not be together, we should just end it now. So Chase is gone for a couple episodes because he broke up with Brooke. Deb comes back, and there's a really funny scene where she sees the house after the party, and she thinks she left the house like this, and Nathan's like, whatever, Mom, just clean it up. Loved that scene. It was really funny. So Brooke ends up going to prom with Mouth in the end of the episode. Mouth obviously doesn't have a date because Shelley broke up with him. Shelley, poorly written character, I think, too. Not a big fan. But anyways, Brooke and Mouth go to prom together. Really nice moment where she comes on the river court to ask him to go to prom. And it was nice seeing those two end up going to prom together, even though they really just go together. They don't do anything. They don't spend time together at prom. And then when we get to the next episode, 16. But when they do get to prom, Brooke, who's upset over the Peyton stuff, how she actually does want to repair their friendship, she's like, at least if Peyton hated me, she still cared. Like right now, it seems like Peyton's just looking right through her, and it's the friendship's over. Like there's nothing there anymore. They get to prom, and her dress has horror on it when they step into the black light, and she's happy about it because it means that Peyton cares, which was a nice little moment, I think. And then ultimately, the end of the episode. Before I get to that, there was a nice scene too. Dan picks Karen up to go to prom. They're going to be chaperones, but they're going as a date. And Lucas, says, "Have a good time, Mom, Dad," and he calls Dan Dad. And I really like that scene. It's bittersweet because we know what's happening in just a couple episodes, but I like that moment. And then, of course, we get to the end of the episode where the way it's filmed is supposed to make you believe that Lucas is the one that's coming to pick up Peyton, but especially if you watched it before, you get it. But if you were watching it the first time, I can't remember if I noticed it at that point or not, but when Lucas is supposed to be getting ready, you actually see the picture of Peyton on the nightstand, and it's a picture that is like, Lucas wouldn't have taken that picture. Indicates it's Psycho Derek. The episode ends with her coming to the door thinking it's Lucas picking her up, Psycho Derek, and he punches her in the face. Cut to black. Then takes us into the next episode, which actually is Prom 416. You call it madness, but I call it love. This episode originally aired May 2nd, 2007. So huge time period where we didn't have an episode between 415 and 16. Between February 21st and May 2nd. This was, so 15, which Paul directed, was actually the 3/4 season finale. It was like before their spring hiatus. And usually they don't have that long of hiatus. Usually it's about a month. Usually it's from like sometime in the beginning of March to like April. And I actually think that the 416, when they came back, it was supposed to come back in April, I want to say. And it got pushed back another week or two to May. But I'm not entirely sure because that's been so long ago. This was, 13 years ago. Wow, that's crazy. I was in 6th grade when this season came out. But yeah, came back in May. Was directed by Thomas J. Wright and written by Terrence Culley, who we know from the past has written a lot of episodes. This episode, the main things about it is his actual prom and his return to Psycho Derek and the final showdown with him. But before we get into all of that, let's talk about some other smaller stuff. We have the stuff with Mouth and Rachel. Rachel shows back up in this episode. She hasn't actually left. She tries to crash prom. Turner kicks her out, and Mouth ends up going with her. And they spend the episode together, pretty much supposed to be like the conclusion to those characters. And then the episode ends, and I'll go ahead and mention this because it's not really connected to the other stuff that's happening. Although before this, Brooke decides something's up. There should be a reason Peyton's not here. So she decides to go check on Peyton, takes Mouth's car actually to go check on Peyton, which leaves Mouth alone at prom. That's why he ends up going with Rachel. They spend the episode together, and the episode ends with Rachel about to get on her flight to go to New Orleans, and Mouth deciding to go with her, so they leave the airport and go off on their own. And that'll come back in the next episode, and we'll get to it. But obviously, besides that, we also have Nathan and Haley. Their big thing in the episode, their car breaks down. Deb has to take them to prom. Nice little moments with them. They end up getting the DW-9I car, which I think I would have rather Deb come back and pick us up than having to drive the DW-9I car, because then now they're responsible for carrying people home, which they do. They have to carry the guy who spiked the punch, and Nathan almost beat up because Haley's pregnant. They have to take him home. He's a douche. But while they're out, they end up going off and going by the cafe and going to the top of the building. And Nathan shows her the prediction that he made when, Haley led him in on the predictions at the beginning of the school year. And his prediction was that they would get back together. So that was a nice little moment, and they dance on the roof. You also have Lucas and Glenda. Lucas thinks that Peyton's on her way because Derek sends that message to him. So he is just taking it easy at prom and hangs out with Glenda, thinking that Peyton's going to show up. And get some more feedback, or they talk more about the novel, how he can't remember certain moments of the school shooting and how he's having trouble writing that part. Um, we also have the stuff with Dan and Karen, showing them, building more on their relationship this season and into their past as well, and Dan's regrets. But also Dan is getting more messages from whoever knows about him and what he did with Keith. He has a note that he finds about, does your date know you murder her fiance? And then also is getting like just more creepy text messages, and he ends up finding a phone later in the episode, and then Lucas appears and he's like, "It's you," and Lucas is like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "This is your phone," and Lucas is like, "That's not my phone." And then he's asked Lucas what he's doing there, and Lucas, says that he's still having trouble with Keith and the Jimmy situation, and Dan, stressed as he is and ticked off, he's like, "Keith's gone. Forget it, Lucas. Open your eyes." And at that moment, that's like the cliffhanger of this episode, actually. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, but that's the cliffhanger of the episode. When he says that to Lucas, Lucas remembers and sees Abby in Whitey's office, which he's standing in front of. So at that point, he remembers Abby, which is going to lead us into future episodes. There's also a deleted scene in this episode where Dan is trying to figure out who's sending him these messages, and he comes across Whitey, and he thinks Whitey's the one that sent him the messages, and he says something about a text message, and Whitey's like, "What the hell is a text message?" It's a little funny scene that, it makes sense why they cut it out, but it was a nice little scene. Whitey also talks to Dan and threatens him kind of in this episode about Karen, how, what the hell are you doing? You're not going to ruin her life again, this sort of thing, which was a nice little dad type moment from Whitey. I'm trying to think what else here I want before I get into. Obviously, Abby Brown walks past Dan at the end of the episode too, and looks at him, hammering it in that she's there and everything, which is interesting because then you find out that she has quit going to school. So it's odd that she did show up at prom a little bit. Especially because really at high school proms you have to buy tickets to go to, so I don't know how all these people that even goes into the next episode, how they show up to prom in Honeygrove and don't have tickets, but whatever. Like I said, sometimes you just have to let things go for the storyline of the show. Then we also have, going back to the main storyline of this episode, is the stuff with Psycho Derek. Brooke ends up going to check on Peyton, and when she gets there, she gets caught too. They're both tied up. Peyton decides, hey, I'll fool around here with his mind and get us free. She makes Derek think that or his name's not even Derek. His name's Ian Banks. I'm just going to go ahead and call him Ian because I hate having to say Psycho Derek every time. So Ian, she tricks him, ends up stabbing him after she's hit Brooke several times. Starts trying to get Brooke free. Then she runs upstairs. Her and Derek fight, which is this really cool scene where she's like learned how to fight from her real brother, and then she starts beating him up, but then he fights back and has her down. Then Brooke comes in and hits him, and then they end up beating the shit out of him, and he falls down the stairs, and then they come down the stairs, and Peyton kicks him one more time unless he lunges, and then Brooke says she's going to call the police, and Peyton says, give me 5 minutes, and then she's just kicking the hell out of him before the police get down there. Okay, so overall, like I said in the earlier video talking about this storyline, I'm not a huge fan of it. I don't hate it in terms of like them doing it in the show. I don't hate it. It's not my least favorite storyline of the show by any means, but it's not my favorite, definitely. I think I would have been done with it earlier in the season and not brought it back. But the one thing that I like about them bringing it back, two things actually, but they're off of each other. One, it ends up repairing the friendship, the Brooke and Peyton friendship. That's ultimately a result of this. But the main thing that I like about him coming back and the showdown in this episode versus the one in the earlier episodes is Peyton is the one, along with Brooke, but even both of them are women, but mainly Peyton is that she defeats him and not Lucas or her real brother or whatever. Like, it's Peyton that does it. And I think that is important to her character and the show that happened, and that it was her that defeats him on her, Brooke's there, but, it's a meaning behind both of them being there with repairing their friendship, and ultimately just the fact that two women defeat this creepo and not help with the guy, I think was important, and I'm glad that they did that. So I'm glad that they brought him back for that reason. However, my main complaint with this, and I can understand why they didn't do it, I would have killed Derek in this episode. Like, I would have had him get killed. I would have had Peyton kill him. Ultimately, I would have had it been her. I don't know how you would have put it in because she doesn't have a gun. Maybe she uses that knife, and maybe he ultimately she stabs him again, and he falls down the stairs after that. Whatever. I think I would have just killed his character. But that's me as a writer, and that's their decision to do this ultimately and to keep him alive. Now, and I can understand the reason why you wouldn't have killed him, because making the decision to kill someone is a big deal as a character. Like, obviously them killing him is different than Dan killing Keith or whatever have you, but, and this being a self-defense thing, but if she did kill him the rest of the time in the show, you would have that would be a factor about Peyton, is that she had killed a person. And you didn't want to do that. You didn't want to put it on her conscience. You didn't want to do that in the show. So I understand it. But personally, I would have done it, because then we get into the next little bit that I'm not a big fan of. But then, so then we go into 417, It Gets Worse at Night, which is an episode that aired May 9th, 2007. This is the episode where there was little backstory about it. There was a competition that CW or whatever did, where you could send in a video, and I can't remember all the details. I think it was like, I don't know if it was an individual person or a bunch of people that had to send in a video, but you had to talk about your hometown and your love of One Tree Hill. And anyways, a hometown ended up getting chosen, and that's why Honey Grove was chosen. It wasn't like they just had this big plan to go to Honey Grove. It could have been any town. It turns out it was Honey Grove because they won the competition, and that's why the episode was filmed there. Greg Prange directed the episode, who does a lot of big ones, and it was written by Mark Schwann and Jim Lee, this is the only episode that Jim Lee has written. I don't know what the situation with that is. It's a little bit weird, because Mark doesn't usually have anybody else writing an episode with him. But anyways, that's who wrote the episode, and they go there because of the competition. They end up going to that prom, which is the high school, and I think the group of girls that confront them when they come to prom, that's actually the winners of the competition, which was a cringe scene, by the way. It's really cool. I say that because, like, a lot of times you have people, like with the win competitions, or you have people that are musicians on the show, like Pete wins when he came on the show. Obviously, terrible actor. Like, you're great at what you do, terrible actor. They came on the scene, and it was just not a good scene. It was very short, obviously, and I'm not saying it shouldn't have been there because they won the competition, and I'm happy for them as One Tree Hill fans, but just not a good scene. They end up going to Honey Grove. It's written in the show because Mouth needs ass, which is assistance. He ends up getting arrested. Rachel left him. And they had a thing, and he's in jail for sleeping on a bench. So they go to Honey Grove to save Mouth. They take Rachel's Denali. Haley keeps making comments throughout the episode how she's so upset over Rachel, which ultimately leads Brooke to telling Haley the truth because she can't live with the guilt. And they get mad, and Haley gets mad at Brooke. They have a little fight, but by the end of the episode, Haley's forgave her, but she tells her, Brooke, you need to get your act together. And she also gives Brooke back their apartment because Nathan and Haley are moving in with them. So she gives the apartment back to Brooke in this episode. Brooke and Peyton have been staying the night together every night since the attack, and they've been staying with Lucas, mostly. And that's how the episode starts, is showing them at Lucas is staying there, and Skills walks in and make a weird comment. It's kind of insensitive and bad writing. But ultimately, too, Peyton asked Brooke to move in with her at the house, but Brooke's like, I've already taken the apartment back, but maybe you can move in with me. So they set that up. for the last few episodes of the season. For some reason, not a big deal. Obviously, I think they would have made more sense for them to move into Peyton's house, but okay. So they crash prom, but before at this high school, and they end up going there. Before that, though, the car breaks down, and a tour bus actually picks them up. Conveniently, on the tour bus is Chris Keller. I'm not really. I don't know if there was a big deal about behind the scenes about them bringing Chris Keller back, or if it was just a fun little thing that they thought and they were able to do. Glad they did. I liked seeing Chris Keller return in this episode, even though really not a fan of him in the high school years because he's such a shitty person, and he's a shitty person in this episode. But like I said, they started changing the character a little bit, still staying true to him being Chris Keller, but they change it up a little bit because he starts having a heart, and you see a different side to him of him with Nathan, talking to Nathan about turning his mind off, but also the stuff later that you find out him and Brooke spend the whole night talking and about their feelings and him crying. And then he obviously leaves at the end and no one cares. But he'll be back in the season 9, the final season, which is my favorite version of Chris Keller when we get to him in season 9. Nathan is also really stressed out this episode. We find out at the end the reason why is he's been getting calls about point shaving, but not concerning him, concerning Lucas. Dan stays over at Karen's in this episode because she finds the door open and he comes and checks the place out. Everything's okay, which I don't really know what was up with that. She just forgot and left the door open, if that's supposed to be the storyline or what it was. Anyways, he comes over there, ends up staying the night because she falls asleep, and then she makes breakfast the next morning. A little sweet moment between them. Lucas and Peyton finally have sex for the first time in this episode, which is more nice little scenes with them. Lucas is looking at yearbooks because he's packed yearbooks, and he finds Abby Brown in the yearbook, and he actually has a conversation with Skills about it, where Skills like, I can never understand how Jimmy could let her go but kill Keith when he knew Keith, which adds to Lucas' suspicion that Jimmy didn't actually kill Keith, him wanting to find the truth. And the episode ends after they leave Honeygrove with Lucas going to Abby's house, but Dan has also been doing research and blackmailing people to do research for him. I find out who that phone was that he found at prom, and he's found Abby's house too. So the episode ends with actually both of them in front of Abby's house, and the tension and the suspense building of what's going to happen in the next episode, which is the last episode I want to talk about here, and that is 418, The Runaway Found, which originally aired May 16th, 2007. It was written by David Jackson and was directed by David Jackson, written by Mark Schwann, who pretty much wrote all of the ending stuff here, I believe. At the end of season 4, all but like one episode, which is 19, the next one after this, he wrote. Which makes a lot of sense, being in the end of not only the end of the season, but the end of the high school years, and essentially ending the show for what it is right now. Because when we get to season 5, it's a continuation, of course, but it's also in a way a soft reboot. Like if you hadn't watched the first 4 seasons, you could still come in season 5 and watch the show without having known what had happened before, because they kind of retell you again. But this episode, big things is Abby. That's the big thing I would think about this episode, along with Psycho Derek haunting Peyton and Nathan dealing with the point shaving stuff. So Psycho Derek is haunting Peyton in this episode. She keeps having visions of him, flashbacks, PSD essentially. Makes sense, and I think that that's very believable. I'm glad they wrote that in there, because that would have probably happened to her character. What I don't like and I hate about this episode is they try to give you some backstory on Ian Banks. That's Psycho Derek's real name. And you can go and do backstory a little bit. I'm fine with that. Like the fact that they did some research on him. She goes and visits him, and he calls her a tease and tries to make it seem like she had some sort of, fault in this, that she was responsible for him doing this because she led him on. This is completely ridiculous. This guy's fucking insane, and it's really sad her having to experience all this. But they do some backstory, and they find out that his ex-girlfriend, who went to prom with him and died in a car crash and he was driving, this girl looks just like Peyton. Okay, that part I don't care about. I don't think it needed to be in there. But if you want to write that in there, then I'm fine, I guess, because you're just explaining why he had a particular stalker issue with Peyton, because she wants that answered. Like, Why me? Why did you choose me? I don't think we needed any kind of explanation other than he's a fucking psycho. So that bothered me. But you wrote in there, you explained it. Okay, whatever. What really bothers me is you continue after that with her and Brooke going to visit him again and confronting him about it, and him crying and trying and saying, she loved me or whatever. I'm like, I don't care. You are a psycho and you deserve to be in prison. Like, I don't care about your character. Don't feel sorry for you by any means whatsoever. And I don't think the character should either. And I don't necessarily think they do. But Peyton's like, I hope you find peace. She's trying to let it go. And okay, she's trying to let it go. But you don't have to resolve everything. And that's a problem I have at certain points. And I have one more in the season before we go into the next season. Sometimes I do think you need to resolve stuff, and I do want everything resolved. And for certain characters too, I do want redemption as far as Dan goes, and his whole storyline, and that's a main storyline for the rest of the series is Dan's redemption. So like that, I'm 100% for. Of course, for little other small things as well. But sometimes you just gotta let things end the way it is. I mean, I got a couple more examples in this season. When we get to later seasons, it comes up as well. Like Brooke's dad in season 9, how they handle that. I hated it. It's like, it's life. Let it go. You don't need a resolution for everything. It just really bothers me. I didn't like that story at all. As far as him coming back and getting backstory on him and whatnot. Lucas ends up taking the fall for the point shaving thing and says that he did point shave in that game, so that he'll try. He wants to try to take the blame off of Nathan, so that Nathan can go to Duke. So he tells Whitey. Whitey gets upset, obviously, that Lucas would do this and that Keith would be ashamed of him. But then Whitey starts looking into it, looking at the footage, and realizes himself that Lucas is lying and that Nathan was really the one that point shaved. And he has a conversation with Nathan as well, which at the end of the episode, Nathan decides he can't go through with Lucas taking the blame, and Nathan admits the truth to the school, to the reporters, that he did point shave in those 2 games, and that he will take whatever is coming his way. Lucas finds Abby. He goes to see her twice. The first time he's just sent away by the mom. That's the time that Dan's outside watching. The second time he actually goes into the house after the mom has left, finds Abby, and the mom comes back and freaks out and kicks him out and pretty much says Abby stopped going to school since the incident, and that she's pretty much had a mental breakdown, and all she says is no. Like, what she's saying doesn't make any sense at this point. So Lucas leaves that. Then we also have this stuff with Dan in this episode. Dan goes to buy ammo first. We don't know what he's going to do. He goes to buy ammo for his gun. The guy at the counter is trying to sell him on a new gun, which he's like, I don't care about. But he picks the gun up and tries it out, holding it, and he aims it. And I'm not really sure if that was supposed to be a mirror. I feel like it was supposed to be a mirror, but maybe it was just supposed to be him actually aiming it. But he picks the gun up and aims it down this way. And he aims it, and then a little girl walks out in front of him and sees him aiming the gun at her, and she, scared, drops her toy and runs away. But I just love all these little scenes with him here at the end of the season. This episode and a couple other ones, just like his character, like that moment with him just aiming his gun and then seeing this innocent little girl and what's going on in his mind at that moment. And then the guy comes back over and says, how did that feel? And you see the crushing emotion in his brain in the scene. And then he ends up, we see him at scene after that, where he goes to a church and he puts the gun in the bag, the brown paper bag, which then he takes to Abby's house. And there's a scene where he confronts Abby and Abby's mom. It's a really good scene because not only Paul is just expressing all these different emotions that Dan would be expressing, both sadness, guilt, anger, anxiety, scared, like all these different things, and how unstable Dan is in this episode. That he would go to Abby's house, that he would go in there, freak out, and then instead of trying to blackmail her or anything that you think the old, what season 2 and 3 Dan might would have done. I don't think he would have done that anyways, because I will try to back up a lot of things that his character does, even if, I mean, I know they're not right. They're done by motivation. He's so broken in this moment that the only thing he can tell this girl that knows the truth that he murdered Keith was the story about Karen and how much she was supposed to be his and how much he loved her. And then she says, I hope you burn in hell. And he says, so do I. Love that. So heartbreaking in his performance and how he delivered that. And then he pulls something out of the back, and it turns out it's that doll the little girl dropped. It's not the gun. And then he leaves. And you're like, what just happened? Like, why did he do that? And then after that, it carries over into another scene where he goes and visits Keith's grave with a bottle of, it could be beer. It looks like a bottle of beer, but it could also have been supposed to be a little bottle of liquor. He ends up dropping it, and it busts on Keith's grave. And then he tries to light a cigarette and drops the Zippo, and the grave itself catches on fire, which I think is another good scene. I probably would have done that a little bit differently, where he dropped the cigarette instead of the actual Zippo, because it was a little like you were forcing this to happen. Anyways, I did like it. Then Abby, that same night, Abby goes to Lucas's room and tells him the truth. Tells him that Dan killed Keith, and that in his heart he should know the truth, and he does. And then he tells Abby, "You've got to tell someone." And Abby says, "I did. I told you." And then she leaves, and Lucas is left there in shock, which takes us to the final scene of this episode, and the final one I'm going to talk about today, and that's Dan comes and is looking at a picture of Keith in Lucas's bedroom and breaks down with Karen about everything that's happening. Not everything that's happening, but like what he's feeling as far as like he wishes he could go back to that kid that he used to be and shake him and tell him to stop. Because, you know, if he had done that, if he had made all these decisions, if he had stayed with Karen at the beginning, all these things that he's regretted his whole life, if he had done that, he would never be in a situation, never would have gotten a situation with Keith that he was in, never would have done all of these terrible things that he can't take back now. And she feels bad for him, and this is a person that I feel like in some way she always carried feelings for, and they kiss. And as they kiss, Lucas walks in, and that's the last thing we see of the episode. That's how the episode ends, is him watching the person that he now knows kill his father figure, kissing his mom. And what's going to happen next? Find out, well, you've already found out, but find out how I feel about it and talking about it on the next episode of the One Tree Hill Rewatch, where I'll be talking about episodes 19 and 20 of Season 4, and then after that I'll be talking about the finale on a separate video on its own. Once I get done with the season, we are, I think, even bringing Ethan in, and we're going to talk about just our favorite moments of the high school years, all 4 seasons up to this point, our favorite moments, favorite episodes, our favorite characters, and a ranking of the 4 seasons. I know I've kind of already told you about mine, so I want to give his opinion as well. But we're going to talk about that, and I will see you guys next time.